The woman at the door smiled, then paused. Her eyes scanned his hands, then the coat he carried, then the color of his skin. "We're not accepting deliveries at this entrance," she said. "What happens to a man when his presence is mistaken for a service?" Vernon Rucker didn't answer. He didn't correct her. He just nodded, stepped aside, and waited for her to move. She didn't. She looked again at the coat, folded so tightly against his arm it could have been part of his body. "You can leave that here," she offered, pointing to a utility table behind her. He didn't leave it. Inside the hall, laughter was already rising. Music from a string quartet drifted past clusters of guests sipping white wine. Vern walked in alone, past polished marble and polished people, his low-heeled shoes clicking with each step. No one stopped him now. But they all saw him. And none of them waved. He passed a row of chairs with a small chalkboard sign, "Family Reserved." No one moved to make room. One woman placed her purse on the empty chair beside her, not meeting his eyes. He didn't ask. He sat 3 rows back, beside a column near the exit. Not where family sits, but close enough to watch. On his lap, the coat pressed, dark, heavier than it looked. He hadn't worn his medals. Just carried them, inside the lining, where fingers sometimes brushed them by instinct. The tag stitched inside the collar still read Rucker, V in fading black thread. A waiter passed with a tray. Everyone reached. Vern didn't. His niece hadn't seen him yet. The music swelled. People turned toward the main aisle. Vern stayed still, the weight of a different kind of silence pressing on his shoulders. They didn't know who he was. And some thought they already did. The music shifted to soft strings and slow piano drifting over white tablecloths and champagne flutes. At the front of the hall, a photographer adjusted his lens, calling for more light near the floral arch. Conversations filled the space like warm water rising, but none flowed in Vern Rucker's direction. He sat still, coat now resting on the empty chair beside him. No one asked to sit there. No one wondered if the seat was saved. A woman in pale blue, no older than 30, walked past with a glass of rose. She glanced at Vern, smiled, then caught herself, as if realizing too late that the smile might be mistaken for interest. She turned her head before he could nod. Not far from his row, Evelyn Sharp leaned into her daughter, Grace. Her voice wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. "Is that him?" she whispered. Grace followed her gaze. "Yeah. That's the uncle from Nikki's side. Army, I think." Evelyn's lips pressed together. "He came alone." Grace shrugged. "Not surprising." A pause. "Not really the kind of veteran they put in TV commercials." The pair laughed quietly. Controlled. Practiced. Laughter meant for people who already agreed. Vern didn't move. His hand rested gently on his coat, thumb tracing a spot near the inside seam where the stitching had begun to fray. He could have stood. Could have left. But he didn't. His back stayed straight, not out of pride, but memory. Muscle learned from decades of standing when others sat. A young server passed by carrying a tray of bacon-wrapped scallops. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to offer one. Vern looked up, nodded once. She returned the nod, placed a small napkin on the chair arm, then walked away. She didn't smile. But she saw him. At the far end of the room, a group of men in dark suits clustered near the bar, loosened ties and jokes bouncing between them. One raised his glass to marrying up, he said, and not inviting the whole tree of the family forest. Caleb Sharp smirked. At least the uncle looks like he knows how to sit still. Someone added, bet he still thinks silence makes him invisible. They laughed. Vern turned his gaze out the tall windows behind the ceremony space. Beyond the glass, a row of pine trees framed the parking lot. A flag on a small brass pole near the entrance flapped lightly, nearly unnoticed. He watched the rhythm of it, steady, even, like breath when it's trained to be quiet. The seat beside him remained empty. Not because no one saw it, but because someone had decided it wasn't worth asking about. Vern adjusted the coat, gently, folding it a little tighter. The bronze star inside pressed lightly against his ribs. No one had said his name yet. Not once since he arrived. And sometimes, that said more than words ever could. Someone adjusted the lights near the head table. A hush rolled through the hall as the band played a softer melody, meant to signal the shift from mingling to formality. A voice on the mic began welcoming guests again, rehearsed and bright. Vernon Rucker didn't move. His fingers rested flat against the lapel of his coat, smoothing a crease that had already been pressed earlier that morning. It was the kind of movement people mistake for habit. But it wasn't. It was a reminder. Of order. Of care. Of control. A waiter brushed past his row, offering sparkling water on a silver tray. Vern reached, paused, then changed his mind. He placed his hand back on the coat. The glass stayed where it was. Untouched. A woman stepped into the aisle nearby, her dress sweeping lightly across the carpet. She looked back, almost as if about to speak, then turned toward her phone instead. The moment passed, unnoticed by her. Not by him. From 3 rows up, someone dropped a name with too much volume. Nikki. His niece. A proud voice, her mother's, shared details about her dress, her job, her fiancé's last name. The room nodded along. Vern listened from the back. His name hadn't been mentioned. It hadn't needed to be. Marcus Rucker Jr., Nikki's older brother, stood near the gift table chatting with another groomsman. When he caught Vern's eye across the room, he gave a short nod. Not cold. Not warm either. A nod that said, I see you. But not one that said, come over. Vern answered it with the same weight. A nod returned. Nothing more. Across the aisle, 2 teenage cousins laughed over something on a phone screen. One of them caught sight of Vern and elbowed the other. No words spoken. Just that look. That shared smile between people who've decided who someone is, without asking. The sound of flatware against glass rang out again, brief, bright. Attention turned forward. A speech was about to begin. Vern shifted in his seat, not from discomfort, but readiness. He didn't lean forward. Didn't sigh. He simply placed both feet square on the floor, his boots polished that morning with an old rag in a quiet mind. The coat remained across his knees. Heavy, like memory. Like metal pressed into ribbon and silence. The man on the mic welcomed family from out of town. Thanked everyone for sharing this day with people who've built legacies worth celebrating. Vern blinked slowly. Once. And didn't look away. A child walked past him toward the restroom, holding the hand of a woman Vern didn't know. The boy glanced up, eyes catching the patch on the coat. For a split second, he slowed. Curious. Not afraid. The woman tugged gently, urging him forward. He followed. Vern watched them disappear into the hallway. Then folded the edge of the coat just a little tighter. Still no one had said his name. Still no one had asked why he sat alone. But Staff Sergeant Rucker didn't flinch. And he didn't explain. The microphone crackled as Caleb Sharp stepped onto the platform beside the wedding cake. His tie had been loosened just enough to suggest charm without effort. One hand in his pocket, the other swirling a glass of something golden aged. The kind of posture people were taught at private schools and cocktail parties. All right, he said with a grin. If I could have your attention for just a moment. Laughter faded, chairs turned, phones paused mid-swipe. I know we've had a beautiful ceremony today, Caleb went on, but let's not forget the true heroes behind every good union, the families who raised us. A round of polite applause. Someone clinked a glass. I think it's fair to say that Nikki's side of the family has certainly added character to this event, he said, his voice bending ever so slightly on the word. Some laughed. A few didn't. Vern didn't move. I mean, take her uncle Vernon, for instance, Caleb continued, nodding casually toward the back of the room. A man of few words. Very few. Heads turned. Some looked over their shoulders. A few didn't bother hiding their smirks. Came here alone, too. Real quiet type. I guess some folks still think silence is the best way to make an impression. The laughter wasn't loud. But it lasted. Vern sat motionless. One hand resting on the coat, the other placed gently on his knee. The knuckles didn't tighten. His posture didn't change. But his gaze, steady, slow, drifted to Caleb just long enough for the younger man to look away first. Caleb cleared his throat, raised his glass again. To family, he said quickly, a half-smile slipping. To family, the room echoed. As guests returned to their meals, a few glanced back toward Vern's table, as if to see whether he'd react. He didn't. He reached for the folded napkin beside his water glass. Opened it carefully. Folded it again. Set it back down. From across the room, Evelyn Sharp leaned in toward her son, whispering something that made him chuckle under his breath. Grace Sharp caught sight of Vern and turned away with an arched brow and a dismissive twist of her shoulder. The band resumed softly, something with a brushed snare and a slow piano line. The chatter rose again, like nothing had happened. Vern adjusted the hem of his coat across his lap. The weight of it sat just above his knees. The lining brushed his fingertips, and he let them rest there. Still. No one apologized. No one approached. No one even said his name. And yet, for a man used to being given orders, ignored by rank, or measured by silence, this silence felt different. Not tactical. Not trained. Just the kind that fills a room when people think you don't belong, but still know you do. Staff Sergeant Rucker remained seated, straight-backed, eyes forward. A man not without voice, but with reason not to use it. Not yet. The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet, carpeted in a way that softened every step. Vern stepped out slowly, the door falling shut behind him with a cushioned click. He didn't walk far, just to the edge of the stone terrace overlooking the parking lot, where a few potted shrubs stood trimmed and still. The evening light had begun to shift. Blue sky thinning toward gold, then gray. The kind of light that doesn't ask for attention, but knows how to change a room. He leaned both hands on the railing, the coat now folded and draped across one arm. A few voices drifted out from behind the glass, muffled by distance and money. Toasts. Laughter. Plates. Crystal. His fingers tapped once against the stone, then stopped. One breath. Then another. Below, cars lined the circular drive, clean, black, mostly German-made. A valet adjusted his vest in the mirror of a Cadillac's passenger door. Another opened a gate for a woman in high heels and a cocktail dress, balancing her phone and her purse like it was part of a well-rehearsed act. Vern watched for a while. Said nothing. A sliding door opened behind him. A burst of music slipped out before it hushed again. Footsteps approached, heels this time. Measured, purposeful. Not hurried. Grace Sharp stopped beside him. Not close enough for conversation. Just close enough for comment. You know, you don't have to stay out here the whole night, she said, eyes ahead, voice light. Vern didn't respond. He didn't nod. Didn't turn. She waited. Then shifted slightly. I'm sure Nikki appreciates you being here. Even if it's not really your scene. Another pause. Then silence again. She didn't stay long. Just long enough for her perfume to linger behind her, something floral and expensive. When she left, her heels didn't make a sound. Like she'd never come at all. The sun dipped another inch. Vern rolled the edge of his coat once, folding it into a tighter square. His hands were steady. Not cold. Just sure. A staff member passed through the hallway, pushing a cart of empty glasses. The man looked up, nodded politely. You all right, sir? He asked. Vern looked at him. A younger man. Brown skin. Clean cut. Quiet eyes. He nodded once. Not to answer the question, but to acknowledge the gesture. The only one all evening that came without a wince behind it. When the cart rolled away, Vern stepped back from the rail. He looked down at his shoes. Ran a thumb along the edge of the sole. A scuff he hadn't noticed before caught the light. Inside the ballroom, the music shifted again. A cue, maybe. For dancing. Or more speeches. Or cake. Vern didn't move to go in. Not yet. Some men show their strength in words. Some in gestures. And some only by standing still, when it would be easier to disappear. The ballroom doors opened again. Not with a bang, just a quiet push, followed by steady steps across carpet meant to muffle everything. Vern turned slightly, not to see who it was, but to measure the space behind him. It was habit. Learned. Kept. The man who approached him wasn't rushed. His suit was tailored, the lines of his jacket moving with the ease of someone used to being listened to. Silver hair, thoughtful face. Not young. Not trying to be. He stopped a few feet from Vern, keeping a respectful distance. Looked at him like someone looking not for words, but for confirmation. Staff Sergeant Rucker, he said gently, voice even low. I wasn't sure until I saw the way you carried the coat. Vern turned fully then. Eyes steady. No recognition yet, but no tension either. The man extended a hand. Jonathan Keller. Nikki's fiancé is my nephew. Ambassador, retired. They shook. One firm press. Then release. My son, Keller said, pausing slightly, served with the 2nd Battalion, back in '09. Southern Kandahar. Specialist Luke Keller. Does that name mean anything? Vern blinked once. A slow breath. I remember, he said. Keller nodded. He told me about a convoy ambushed on a dirt road they weren't supposed to take. 2 vehicles hit. Fire everywhere. He said someone pulled him out when the flames hit the ammo crate. Said that man went back twice more before air support even showed. Vern didn't answer. Not right away. He wrote your name down when he finally got home, Keller continued. Said he never got to say thank you. But he still talks about you. Silence settled again. Not awkward. Not forced. Just real. He's a teacher now, Keller added after a moment. Has 2 boys. One of them just joined ROTC. Vern gave a slow nod. Then looked back toward the trees, where the flag near the entrance had stopped moving. Most days, Keller said, we assume the people who change everything for us will be dressed a certain way. Sit in certain places. Vern didn't look at him. But his hand shifted, adjusting the fold of the coat across his arm. Keller took a step closer. Not too close. Would you allow me, he said quietly, to introduce you to the room properly? There was no urgency in his voice. No need to impress. Just a question. Asked gently. Offered with weight. Vern looked at him now. Really looked. And then, he nodded once. Just once. But that was enough. Ambassador Keller didn't return to his table. He stepped quietly toward the band, exchanged a few low words with the man holding the microphone. The music faded, soft piano notes dissolving into the hush that always follows when something unfamiliar begins to unfold. The room hadn't noticed at first. But slowly, heads turned. Forks paused. Conversations thinned. And then the stillness came, gentle, expectant. Ladies and gentlemen, Keller began, his voice carrying not through volume, but through something heavier. Earnest. Grounded. If I may steal just a moment of your time. He stood center floor, one hand resting lightly at his side, the other holding nothing. Most of you know me as Jonathan Keller. I'm here today as a family guest. But I'm also here as a father. People shifted in their seats. Some glanced at each other. No one interrupted. My son served in the army over a decade ago. He came home because someone made a choice to step back into fire when no one else did. That someone is in this room. He let the words sit. Just long enough. Staff Sergeant Vernon Rucker, Keller said clearly, saved my child's life. There was no applause. Not yet. Keller turned slowly, eyes scanning the rows until he found Vern near the edge of the room. He faced him directly. Took a step forward. Sir, he said, voice lowered, steadier now. For your service, your sacrifice, and your silence. I thank you. And then, in front of 100 people dressed for comfort and ceremony, Ambassador Keller bowed. A full bow. From the waist. No irony. No performance. The silence broke not with claps, but with breath. A murmur, like something sacred had been dropped in the middle of the dance floor. Someone stood. Eleanor Keller, seated near the front, rose slowly. Hands at her side. Then another. And another. Chairs moved back. One by one, guests stood. No music. No cue. Just quiet acknowledgement, catching up with truth. Vern did not rise. He didn't wave it off. He sat, coat folded across his lap, eyes lowered not in shame, but in memory. No medals pinned. No speech given. And yet, he'd never been seen more clearly. The music never resumed. It didn't need to. Conversations didn't pick back up the same way either. There was a gentleness to the room now, like someone had laid a wool blanket over the noise. Vernon Rucker sat with his back straight, but his hands had softened. One rested on the folded coat. The other quietly settled on the seat beside him, where no one sat. Just a space. And the air in that space felt stiller than the rest. Nicole crossed the floor first. Her shoes tapped once, then slowed when she reached him. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to fix what had happened. She simply knelt one knee to the carpet, her head slightly bowed, not in apology, but in recognition. She reached up and gently touched the sleeve of his coat. A breath passed between them. He looked at her, not past her, not through her. At her. And then gave the faintest nod. Marcus Jr. followed, slower. Less certain. But he came. And stood. Not too close, not too late. He just stood, both hands at his side, eyes steady on the man he'd grown up hearing about, but never truly seeing. Somewhere in the back, Grace Sharp looked away. Evelyn set down her glass. Then came Ambassador Keller. Again. But this time, not to speak. Not to explain. He knelt beside the chair, not low, not grand. Just close enough. He touched the coat too. Only for a second. And whispered something only Vernon heard. Vern didn't respond. Didn't have to. His jaw tightened slightly, but not with strain, just the effort of staying present. Of not drifting into all the memories stitched into the seams of that coat. It wasn't regulation anymore. Too old. Too faded. It had been patched once near the wrist, the stitching barely visible now. But it was warm. And it was his. And it had carried more than rain and wind. It had carried the weight of watching others fall. Of coming home to quiet streets. Of showing up to weddings alone. As the crowd slowly resumed their seats, something had shifted. Not loudly. Not all at once. But enough that when Vern finally stood, his hands empty, his coat still folded neatly on his arm, the silence greeted him like an old friend, not a stranger. He walked out with no applause. Just the soft rustle of suits adjusting in chairs. The sound of ice following not a man, but a story they hadn't bothered to ask. And behind him, on the chair he'd left, sat the folded coat. Still. Upright. As if holding its own spine. There's a quiet kind of dignity that never asks for recognition, but when it's finally seen, it changes everything. Vernon Rucker didn't demand respect. He didn't interrupt the laughter or correct the whispers. He simply sat, holding a coat that told more truth than any speech ever could. And when someone finally looked closely, when they touched the worn fabric, the silence it carried spoke louder than words. This story reminds us, it's not always the loudest person in the room who holds the deepest history. Sometimes, the quietest man, sitting alone, dressed simply, with a memory folded across his lap, is the one who's carried us all farther than we knew. Maybe it's time we asked, who are we overlooking? Who among us is wearing history we no longer recognize? If this story moved you, even just a little, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Black Veteran Stories. Because these voices, often silenced, often alone, deserve to be heard, honored, and remembered. Have you ever seen someone overlooked and wished you'd said something? Tell us in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear.